A historic first in the U.S. as Donald Trump has become the country's first former president to be indicted. Washington is seeking to establish counsel access to the American journalist detained in Russia on suspicion of espionage.
Actress Gwyneth Paltrow wins her court battle over a 2016 ski collision that the complainant Terry Sanderson said allegedly left him with broken ribs and psychological damage. Turkey unanimously votes to ratify Finland's NATO membership, solidifying Helsinki's place in the American-backed alliance.
In a first keynote speech on EU-China relations, Ursula von der Leyen says Beijing is becoming more repressive at home and more assertive abroad.
The Vatican says that Pope Francis is gradually improving after he was admitted to hospital with a respiratory infection on Wednesday.
In a historic move, Donald Trump has become the first former U.S. president to face a criminal indictment. The 76-year-old has been indicted by a New York grand jury. The charges center on payments he made during the 2016 presidential campaign to silence claims of an extramarital sexual encounter. Prosecutors focused on $130,000 paid to porn star Stormy Daniels to keep her from going public with claims that she had a sexual encounter with him. The move follows years of investigations into his business, as well as his political and personal dealings. Trump called the decision, quote, political persecution and election interference at the highest level. He's running for the White House in 2024.
Legally speaking, this case won't affect the 2024 presidential race. If Trump wins, of course, no sitting president can be prosecuted, so the case will have to stop. But even if Trump is convicted before the election, these charges don't disqualify him from holding public office.
New York's District Attorney Alvin Bragg has become the man behind the first vote to criminally indict a former president. Outside Bragg's office in Manhattan, dozens of people demonstrated against the former president, saying that Trump lies all the time. However, dozens more showed their support for the former president at the same time, which meant security had been heightened around the area. Washington is seeking to establish counsel access to Evan Gershkovich, the American journalist detained in Russia. The 31-year-old writes for the Wall Street Journal and has been detained on suspicion of espionage. It's the first time a U.S. correspondent has been accused of spying since the Cold War.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. These espionage charges are ridiculous. The targeting of American citizens by Russian government is unacceptable. We condemn the detention of Mr. Gershkovich in the strongest terms. We also condemn the Russian government's continued targeting and repression of journalists.
And the European Union condemns the detention. In a tweet, the EU's foreign affairs chief says that journalists must be allowed to exercise their profession freely and deserve protection. The United Nations expresses concern over the growing trend of reporters being arrested while doing their job.
The Secretary General has expressed his concern over and over again at the growing trend where we're seeing journalists being harassed or detained or worse just for doing their job. And I will leave it at that.
However, Russia's foreign ministry spokesperson says Gershkovich's activities cannot be called journalism. The Wall Street Journal vehemently denies the allegations and is seeking his immediate release.
No.
The jury has ruled that actress Gwyneth Paltrow is not liable for an accident on an upmarket US ski slope. Eye doctor Terry Sanderson alleged a collision with the star in Utah had left him with 4 broken ribs and lasting psychological damage, and had sued for compensation to the tune of $3.3 million in damages. The Shakespeare in Love actress countersued for a symbolic $1. Her attorney says she's delighted.
We're pleased with this outcome and appreciate the judge and jury's thoughtful consideration and handling of the case. Gwyneth has always had a history of advocating for what she believes in, and this statement was no different. And she will continue to stand up for what is right.
Addressing reporters after the verdict, Sanderson questioned whether the lawsuit was worth it and said he believed that people tend to naturally side with celebrities like Paltrow. Turkey has become the final NATO nation to ratify Finland's membership of the US-led alliance in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Turkish lawmakers unanimously backed the Nordic country's accession to NATO 2 weeks after President Recep Tayyip Erdogan publicly blessed the bid. The parliamentary deputy speaker says that out of 276 votes, 276 had accepted Finland's NATO bid membership, and that the bill had now been approved and was now law. In a tweet, Finland's President Sauli Niinisto thanked NATO member states for their support and says he's looking forward to welcoming Sweden in joining them. And NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg took to Twitter to say the move will make the NATO family stronger and safer. Both Finland and Sweden's bids were stalled by Turkey and Hungary for months. Hungary's parliament ratified Finland's bid on Monday. But in particular, President Erdogan has put up stiff resistance to Sweden's application because of a series of long-standing disputes accusing the nation of supporting terrorists. Officials expect the process of Finland becoming the 31st member of the security alliance to be completed as early as next week.
Europe must be tougher on China. That's the assessment of European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who described Beijing on Thursday as becoming more repressive at home and more assertive abroad. Ahead of a trip to the Chinese capital with French President Emmanuel Macron next week, she set the tone during a speech in Brussels for what she's calling the new era on EU-China relations.
I believe it is neither viable nor in Europe's interest to decouple from China. Our relations are not black or white, and our response cannot be either. And this is why we need to focus on de-risk, not decouple.
The visit comes following a high-level meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russia's Vladimir Putin in Moscow, as concerns grow that Beijing may provide support for the Kremlin's war in Ukraine.
Any peace plan which would in effect consolidate Russian annexations is simply not a viable plan. We have to be frank on this point. How China continues to interact with Putin's war will be a determining factor for EU-China relations going forward.
One key point of the European Commission President is that China wants to use Russia's current weakness to grow its own geopolitical strength and influence, and that Moscow is increasingly becoming the junior partner in the relationship.
It is clear from this visit that China sees Putin's weakness as a way to increase its leverage over Russia. And it is clear that the power balance in that relationship, which for most of the last century favored Russia, has now reversed.
Mikko Huhtaari, who runs a European think tank that's been sanctioned by China, says that the EU needs to adjust to a more bipolar world, but it must do so on its own terms.
We cannot have a trusted and deep relationship with a China that would support and continue to support the Russian war machine. So better than being pushed around by others to tell us what we need to do in this space, it's better for us to define the terms of our engagement.
Do we have time?
Well, it's a very urgent business indeed. There are risks that will probably increase. Our dependence is extremely high in certain aspects. And the geopolitical tensions around China are increasing. So it's an urgent business, but at the same time, let's do it properly and not overreact.
Von der Leyen also says that the EU needs to reassess a landmark investment agreement negotiated with China that's been put on ice since 2021 due to a number of ruptures in the relationship.
Iran cannot unlock some €1.8 billion in assets frozen by Washington to pay compensation to victims of a 1983 bombing. That's what the International Court of Justice ruled on Thursday. It also said Washington's decision to freeze Iranian assets was illegal and said the US must pay damages.
The court concluded that the United States has violated its obligation under Article 4, Paragraph 1 of the Treaty of Amity.
If the two parties can't agree on a figure for compensation, they must return to The Hague for a ruling. But the top court acknowledges it has no jurisdiction over the bank's funds. Despite heightened tensions between the two countries after retaliatory strikes between Iran-backed forces and US personnel in Syria last week, both countries welcomed the verdict and claimed victory.
The Vatican says that Pope Francis is gradually improving after he was admitted to hospital with a respiratory infection on Wednesday. His hospitalisation raised fresh concerns over the health of the 86-year-old pontiff, who suffers from a number of medical conditions. But the latest update from Vatican spokesperson Matteo Bruni confirmed that Pope Francis had resumed his work while his treatment continues. Our correspondent Giorgia Orlandi has more from Rome.
The Vatican also said that the Pope is touched by the many messages he received. Now, the Pope's latest hospitalization, we know that he's been treated several times already, comes ahead Palm Sunday on April the 2nd, which marks the start of one of the busiest times of year for the Pope, filled with lots of ceremonies leading to Easter Sunday on April the 9th. Now, it's not yet clear whether or not Pope Francis will be replaced. Last year, he was replaced at some point as he could not lead ceremonies due to a problem to his knee. So we'll find out later on whether or not planned treatments will have to continue and whether or not it will have to be replaced. Giorgia Orlandi for Euronews.